The American Teilhard Association podcast features conversations and interviews which explore the life, thought, and vision of mystic scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. We express our gratitude to Dalesford Abbey in Paoli, Pennsylvania, for allowing us to use their space and equipment in making this episode possible. Tess Elia is a spiritual director whose practice centers on the Ignatian invitation to find God in all things. Her approach is rooted in a lifetime of rich experience spanning a career in healthcare, pastoral work in hospice settings, university teaching, and the sacred vocation of raising children. Tess currently serves as a spiritual director at Fairfield University and Yale Divinity School. She leads the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius in both traditional and adapted forms and regularly facilitates retreats. She is trained in spiritual direction at the Murphy Center for Ignatian Spirituality of Fairfield University and is certified in giving the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the 19th Annotation. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the American Teilhard Association podcast. Today we have with us Tess Elia. Tess, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Andrew, for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Tess is a friend and a member of the American Teilhard Association. She's gotten very involved over the past couple of years. We've been very grateful to have her presence as a part of our organization. So, Tess, could you please share with our audience today a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I certainly can. I'm a spiritual director and trained in the Ignatian tradition. And so I'm very drawn to the work of Teilhard because I see so much of his Ignatian roots in the work that he does and has done and written about. I'm a mom, a wife. I have 3 grown children. I'm a spiritual director for Yale Divinity School, where I work with students some who are in the process of being ordained, some who are seekers. And I also work with some faculty there and staff. And I see undergraduate students at Fairfield University and adults in the community. And I also work with a center for people who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And we run a spiritual care program there.
Well, thank you for all that wonderful work and service that you do for our world. And our conversation today, obviously, is brought together by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, inspiration for the organization, for our podcast, and appropriately so for our talk today. So I'm curious to learn as we dialogue today how Teilhard has come into your journey here, along with all those other amazing things you're doing. So when and how did you meet Teilhard?
You know, Andrew, I think about this question often because I can't think of one seminal moment when I had the big aha. You know, I feel somehow, and maybe some of your listeners do too, that I've known Teilhard all my life because his ideas are so resonant with my own when it comes to my experience of God. But I can say, in thinking about this, probably in high school, I came across his famous quote that we are not humans having a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that quote resonated so deeply with me and brought my awareness to him probably first and foremost. And then in college, I knew of him peripherally, and then I had a huge aha moment, I guess, in college or grad school, I should say. I was doing neuroscience research and had the ability to look through an electron microscope, which was amazing to me at the time. I was looking at a nerve cell, a neuron, and looking through the microscope into this dark field where I could see floating bodies that were illuminated. I just immediately connected in such a powerful way with seeing the universe in a single cell and wow. And knowing that, yeah, it was a very powerful experience of God for me because I truly do believe that God is the animating energy and it permeates all things. And so that deeply connected me with Teilhard, understanding that the very energy that animates a single cell and subatomic particles is the same energy that is holding our universe together. And that drew me deeply into the work of Teilhard.
So as you're looking through that electron microscope, are you having like thoughts of Teilhard or his words coming to you in that moment, or was it kind of like an afterthought where you're like, "Oh my gosh, that was all Teilhard"? What was that like?
Well, it was definitely a moment of the experience of God in all things. And I think I wasn't just overwhelmingly thinking Teilhard, but certainly immersed in the ethos of Teilhard, of seeing God in all things and understanding that power of love and unity and a unitive force that animates our universe. So yeah, that was a powerful moment, and it caused me to want to do more reading in
Mhm.
Teilhard. And then reading Teilhard by myself, I do still find challenging because the ideas are dense. And I've very much appreciated doing the book studies with the American Teilhard Association and listening to the presentations that are offered through this wonderful organization. But certainly his ideas, the book, The Divine Milieu, the idea that God is the ground within which we live and move and have our being, all of those things are very meaningful to me as a spiritual director. I very much believe so much of what Teilhard has given to us in all of his writings.
Mhm. So let me ask you, how did you get into spiritual direction?
Hmm. I had experienced spiritual direction years ago and found it profound.
Mhm.
I think that I've wanted to have a better and deeper understanding of God and my own spirituality more than just participating in church services. And a spiritual direction gave me that opportunity to really look closely at what I did believe
Mhm.
and talk openly about what I didn't believe.
Mhm.
So I appreciated the experience, and then I felt called to the ministry. And I was fortunate to be trained at Fairfield University, which is a wonderful Ignatian university. And I had been trained by, I think, the finest people. And I felt very grateful for that education. So learning about Ignatius gave me Saint Ignatius, who is the founder of the Jesuits and wrote many of the sort of rules that we have for spiritual direction, a lot of guidance. Studying Saint Ignatius deeply also gives me a lot of insight into Teilhard because I often read and hear Teilhard's words through the lens of Saint Ignatius. I see so much of Saint Ignatius's work or thinking in Teilhard's work, which
Mhm.
I think is so beautiful. This thread that spans 400 years. They died quite almost exactly 400 years apart. Ignatius died in 1556 and Teilhard in 1955. So really almost 400 years.
Mhm.
But the thread of these powerful ideas, theological ideas, um, are so encouraging. It's encouraging to me to see how they've evolved, how Teilhard evolved those ideas further, and I'm eager to see what then comes from further evolution of the ideas of Saint Ignatius.
Yeah, it's this very interesting evolution of tradition, both within the Ignatian sense, within the wider Catholic sense of different spiritualities that people have, and then, even you can just keep expanding beyond that, right, to like a Christian
Mhm.
sense and a more universal, which is really the meaning of the word Catholic. But we don't need to parse those apart now. What's really intriguing to me in relation to your work with spiritual direction and your connection with Teilhard and the American Teilhard Association is the importance of the interior life and how we have approached Teilhard from such a scholarly perspective for so long. And there are great scholars that have wrote phenomenal books about his mysticism. Sister Kathy Duffy, Elia Dilio, Cynthia Bourgeot. All these people have explored this stuff. But what I'm really looking for is something that pertains to our interior life and those dynamics of the spirit and those movements of the spirit. And Augustine Udius just has a book that came out regarding, the spiritual exercises in that way, getting more into Teilhard spirituality. So that's what I've really been looking forward to with our conversation today is, exploring your journey and how you've integrated Teilhard, especially with your work as a spiritual director. Um, So, I mean, you've spoken to how his Teilhard's vision has influenced your work generally, but how about your personal growth? How would you say that Teilhard has been a guide for you in that way?
Well, you've touched upon so many things there, Andrew. So if you don't mind, I'm going to bring us back to the first statement about
Yeah,
Catholic
feel
being
free.
universal.
We got all the
Okay,
time in the
thanks.
world, so take your time. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Um, I'm glad that you brought up several points there. And first and foremost, I want to say that when we do spiritual direction, we are never talking about the institutional church. So it is never a place of conversion or persuasion, or we are always immersed in the conversation about a person's experience of God. And that doesn't matter what faith background a person comes to us with. And it also doesn't matter the terminology. So some people are even uncomfortable with the term God. So we're looking at how the divine is working in a person's life. And so the institutional church doesn't usually come into play at all. It's a very personal experience in looking and helping a person look inwardly. And then you also mentioned
I was just gonna say, I
the
think it's really important because Teilhard was at odds with the institutional church for a large
exactly.
portion of his life. So, yeah,
Yes, so
it didn't
true.
stop his interior development. If anything, it
And
encouraged it, maybe. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that draws me even deeper into Teilhard because of the obstacles that he faced. Many people would have just said, I'm done and I quit and I'm leaving. And yet he stayed true to his sense of devotion to God. And he felt I'm mostly attracted, I must say, to Teilhard's deep spirituality. I know many people are drawn to Teilhard because of his brilliance and his scientific and cosmological contributions. He was so prescient, he was so ahead of his time, and I do admire all of that. But I am deeply drawn to his sense of commitment and spirituality and truly seeing God in all things and his commitment to love and action and wanting to bring that forward in the world. So that draws me deeply into my deep admiration for Teilhard. You had also talked about how Teilhard, or you asked about how Teilhard integrated his inner movements or perception of his inner movements and within his soul. I find this also fascinating. And this is very Ignatian. So, Saint Ignatius, gave us the gift of recognizing that God is a self revealing God, that God is not playing hide and seek and hiding in a corner waiting for us to go find God. God is with us and there's a sense, an impulse of revealing God's self to us throughout our whole life. And Ignatius spoke about how to discern that by paying attention to the inner movements, the stirrings of our heart, our desires. And he also invited us to use our imagination to be with God. And I see that in Teilhard's work often. I think Teilhard very much paid attention to how things were affecting him. So, not just how he was thinking about things, but how it was moving him internally and interiorly.
Mhm.
And I think that has been an incredible model in terms of blending theology and science, looking both at the scientific hard work part of it, but also how is this moving me interiorly? What am I feeling? How is this calling me? And I do feel like Teilhard paid a lot of attention to that call. Um, and also, Ignatius gave us rules for discernment. So, how to discern consolation from desolation, how to discern what God is calling us to, how to decide what is our higher self, what is the magis of our life, the greater call of our life. And I see that all throughout Teilhard's work. He never let go of the call to his highest self. He continued to push on despite the obstacles and the suffering and the rejection that he received. So I just am so inspired by him in all of those ways.
Thank you, Tess. Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I like how you are like any true Ignatian, inserting those Ignatian buzzwords within your responses to these questions, like
Yeah,
where you said seeking God in all things. You just
yeah,
brought up the word the magis, right? The more. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, there's a, I don't know if you've ever heard this Ignatianism, but do what you are doing.
That's a new one on me. Do
It's a
what
little
you were
less
doing.
common one, I think. Yeah, but a former colleague of
Mm,
mine, I heard say that one time.
yeah.
But yeah, do what you're doing. And yeah, that speaks to Teilhard's ethos of just being present no matter what the situation is. Like he's in the middle of the desert in China looking at rocks and bones. He's in the trenches during the war. He's in a classroom teaching. He's celebrating mass, right? He's living a number of lifetimes within the span of, one. And he's incredibly present no matter what. And he's this powerful example of what you're speaking to regarding how important it is to take our external knowledge and wisdom and couple that with our internal knowledge and wisdom, if you will, talking about the movements of the spirit within us, how we grow spiritually, how we face challenge, and we must exercise and grow in the practice of discernment in order to, be continually growing closer to God in that way and cultivating relationship. Um, yeah, so that's all really rich stuff, and I would encourage our listeners, if they've not, explored these aspects of, if they're coming to us from a Teilhard perspective, right, and they're unfamiliar with those more spiritual dynamics of his person and of his vision in terms of his Ignatian tradition, it's really worth exploring. Even, I would say, if they're not coming from a Catholic background, Ignatius uses a pretty diverse language in there. Well, wide enough to, I think, speak to a number of, different audiences in that way. I mean, he himself was quite a interesting person, not to get, too much in the history of St. Ignatius, but, he lived a number of lifetimes before coming to his conversion. And I think that's, a testament to why the spirituality has been around for so long, why it's so prevalent, why it's really so popular. There have, of course, been a number of contemporary Jesuit authors who have really put his Ignatius's words and ethos into a modern context. And yeah, and Teilhard now
And
comes from the science perspective. I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, and I will just also remind you, Andrew, that he also was challenged by the church. He was brought up for Inquisition because he was creating these spiritual exercises that had never been done before. And the church was suspicious that this is some strange technique or whatever. So he also was brought up, in an Inquisition type way and almost sanctioned. Thankfully, he wasn't.
Yeah.
And one of the other similarities that I'd like to point out is that Ignatius, even in the 1500s, ministered to women one on one, was interested in spiritual growth of women, which at the time was not really popular, certainly. And I also find it inspiring that Teilhard had a sense of the feminine in his writing and respect for women and bringing in all those different viewpoints as well. So it's another common thread that I see. And you did mention the inner discernment and inner paying attention to the inner stirrings. I recently gave a retreat for high school juniors students, young women, high school students. And it was so important for them to be able to honor what was going on inside of them rather than just making all the decisions from their thinking mind, but to stop and really do that inquiry, that self inquiry of when I put myself in that situation, what am I feeling? Like when I imagine myself going to a specific college, how does that, what am I feeling? What am I sensing? Is it joy? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? And just honoring that our emotions have a lot, our inner movements have a lot to say to us. And we believe that this is how God speaks to us, right? In our inner movements, the inner movements of our spirits.
Mhm.
And paying attention to that is very important. And when young people spend so much time on a screen, that's very externalizing their thinking. So it's an important message that we were given by Ignatius and Teilhard, I think, to pay attention to those stirrings.
Yeah, and even more prescient in our modern age, postmodern age, right? Where you mentioned screens and the influence of media technology. Social media obviously has a huge impact on all people, but especially young people whose brains are still developing, right? Um,
Mm,
so I'd like to ask you about your work as a spiritual director with young people.
mm.
I wouldn't anticipate that you are, um, like teaching them about Teilhard, right? Like all of a sudden, like, oh, here's this great scientist and mystic, and let me hit him over the head with all of these complex thoughts that he have. That even I like you mentioned earlier too,
Yeah.
that his writing is dense and sometimes hard to work with, and that's just mutually agreed upon everyone, whether they are newer to Teilhard's thought, whether they have been scholars for decades with his work, they're still like, yeah, it's really dense. It's a lot to chew through. So yeah, I don't imagine that you are, hitting your directees, especially the younger ones, over the head with Teilhardian canon in that way. But do you ever find, it appropriate to kind of like slip in a concept or something like that while working with them?
I love this question because, to be honest, Andrew, it's one of my greatest challenges is to resist the impulse, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
because um, spiritual direction is much more about listening and not about teaching, right? And one of my own personal great teachers says, if you're having a conversation, you're not doing spiritual direction, right? You're trying to listen and you're trying to help a person um, experience their experience of God, or articulate their experience of God. But I must admit, it does come up often when there's so much about Teilhard that I love, and
Mhm.
I will reference prayers that he's done occasionally, or I will certainly talk about the concept of God in all things. When once someone recognizes that God is not a being in the clouds and out there, that God is with us, that God is the divine milieu, that God is as close to us as water is to a fish, right? God is all around us and in us, and we are part of God. Once they realize that they're integrated with God, it changes everything. It really allows a person to see life differently. So, if from Teilhard, I guess I could say that, and Ignatius, that gossamer thread that connects them both. I'm always willing to bring that into the conversation when it's appropriate.
Yeah, I'm also in similar camp. It's like guerrilla Teilhard insertion. Like you want to try and find
Yes.
ways to not too formally introduce an idea or whatever, even if it's not by name, right? It's still a concept or something. Like
Mm.
what's one of the ones that I like to talk about? The idea of creative union, right? And how these
Mm.
wholes are formed, especially when we approach chaotic times. I'm not the scientist to describe it, but the edge of chaos is that point of breakdown within a system in which it makes it even more possible for newness to, materialize from there.
Mm.
So, yeah, yeah, I appreciate that as well. So, in working with younger people, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, the other, to your point, the concept of unification with diversification, right? That we
Yeah,
can
that's
be
a great one
unite
there.
and diversify. Love those themes. Yeah, yeah, so important.
Yeah, that's a very relevant one nowadays when there are some real strong social movements or political movements, whatever you want to call them, just to like go with the crowd. Either way, the crowd
Mm.
is going, whatever way it's going, and to stand one's ground and really take stock of, like you were referring to earlier, one's internal sense of what something is about and what someone is about is really important. And the idea that we can find, greater difference through unity, I think, is really important. Like
I do too.
a lot of hyper-focused movements within our culture, within the world. And I mean, some of them are totally legitimate in like who they're trying to minister to and the message they're trying to spread. But in some cases, it begins to form an echo chamber because it's so hyper focused, it becomes exclusionary. And I really think that Teilhard's challenge for us in this day and age, this current day, is to find things that bring us together. And there will be challenges in that unification. But in that commonality, there is a greater differentiation, he says, right? We find what our
Yes.
gifts are. We see what our shortcomings and weaknesses are and how we can maybe learn from others and how we can coexist better that way. So that's another great one.
Yeah, it really is a beautiful concept, and we can see it in nature that nature loves diversity and yet works so harmoniously together. And we, as humans, we should also do the same thing, right? And respect the diversity, understand that that's our strength,
Yeah.
and we can remain unified with diversity, which is a beautiful concept that Teilhard gave to us in scientific terms, but also very deeply theological terms as well.
So, Tess, how long would you say that you've been working with young people in any context, spiritual direction?
For a long time. Yeah, I've been working with young people throughout my career.
So, Tess, let me ask you, in working with these young people, then the question I guess I'm thinking of getting at there is, what evolutions have you noticed over the years in terms of what young people are working with? Is it generally the same thing in terms of a quest for God and a sense of self and authenticity? Do you see that changing with the way that our world is evolving, where things have become a little bit maybe more perceived to be chaotic, anxiety ridden? Are there concerns about the larger world? I mean, what are some of maybe the changes you've seen over the years in working with young people?
Oh, thank you for that question, Andrew. It's a good one. Certainly, there's a lot of anxiety I see with young people, and there is also a lot of seeking. So I think that the young people that I meet with, and many of them are undergraduates, they are looking for a faith that they can inhabit, that they can believe, right? So many of them are shedding kind of the faith that they might have. It's sort of a deconstruction to reconstruct. So many of them are letting go of some of the more um, formulaic things that they might have grown up with, and really wanting to grab a hold of a faith that they can really believe and live.
Mhm.
So the opportunity to explore who God is for you, or where do you think you experience God, or what does that even mean? It's wonderful for young people to sit and just contemplate those questions,
Mhm.
because often they're sort of fed this idea of what institutional religion might say God is, or
Mhm.
they're participating or attending a service, but not really integrating what it means to them personally. And um, to have that opportunity is really important. But in terms of change, certainly I see a level of concerningly, a level of disconnect that sort of grows, right? So people, I think students are becoming a little more isolated, a little through their technology, and a little less connected to their inner movements of their heart, the inner stirrings of their heart, and a little bit less use of their imagination. So one of the gifts of Ignatius that Teilhard uses is his imagination. When Teilhard wrote the Mass on the World, he imagined all of it, and it was stunningly beautiful. Um, this is a gift that Ignatius gave us. Use your imagination to uh, engage with God. To engage in what your beliefs are actually, and explore with imagining yourself in relationship to God and what that would look like. So I see less of that. I think students, because they're doing certainly a lot through technology, AI now, um, it's a little bit less using your own resource. Does that resonate with you, Andrew, as well, with your work with young people?
Yeah, and I mean, my work now with young people is different than it was, say, 10 years ago when I was teaching in a school and doing campus ministry. Um, but I do have to say that when I see the young people here coming to the Abbey on retreat, I am seeing the more imaginative, creative side because
Wonderful.
they're on retreat, so they're not in their school, right? They're off
Hmm. Hmm.
campus. They're dressed down, so if they're coming from a Catholic school, they're not in a uniform. They're following less standard codes of conduct in that way, so there's more freedom for self-expression, I think. There's a way to exercise their spirituality that is not so religious per se, but just to see that the
Hmm.
way they decorate rooms sometimes is so cool. Balloons and streamers, and there's posters they've hung up with like words of affirmation and stuff like that. And it all has to do with God and the spiritual life and interior growth and that stuff, but it's in a language that resonates with them. So I do share the concerns that you've clearly expressed regarding anxiety, disconnection, turning in on oneself in a very negative way and not like a self-reflective way, but in a navel-gazing type way. Um, and I think that is across the board to generations playing out too, but we see it most amplified in our younger generations because we naturally put our hope in them. They're our future in that way. So, having children of my own now, I have younger children, you have grown children. So, opposite ends of the spectrum, but I already have that
Mm.
sentiment of investing in them and seeing them as the future and wanting the best for them and wanting to see them do well. And that's a challenge in that way. And there's a pressure that builds, but it's very Teilhardian, right? How can we look at that dynamism and tension and pressure as like kind of a pressure cooker for something that's growing and forming a more unit of whole, maybe despite the challenge. But yeah,
I do also I do also sense a hunger. Like there does seem to be, as things seem less stable in the world, I see more people seeking a
yeah,
faith or hunger for hope, and a, a sense of benevolence in the universe. So there is also an increasing call, I think, just to a belief in God. And so much of what Teilhard gave us just distilled to his ideas about love being the animating force in the universe. I mean, if we could just get that message across, and not in such an abstract way. I mean, in that love is that energy that causes us to want to be together, and it causes us to want to transform and see each other transform. And if that is the message that we distill it all down to, it's such an important one to share, especially with young people, that love is that connection, that energy of connection and transformation, wanting the best for those around you. And if students were taught that message and lived that message, the world would be a very different place, right? It's not about singularly achieving or singularly getting the trophy or winning the prize, but it's about all of us rising up together. And that's the power of, I think, Ignatius and Teilhard. I think they both tell us that over and over, that this is what God calls us to, and this is what God is, that God is love, and that is the message.
yeah, it's funny to see how many people, young people, middle-aged people, older people, are still carrying with them those chains, those shackles of, you used the word earlier, the term deconstructing religion, right? Of
Mm.
their initial religion or faith-based system they were raised in. And this is a theme that's come up over the last few podcast interviews I've done, but just how, despite our world evolving to such heights scientifically, mathematically, with physics and all of our applied sciences, our faith life and our applied spirituality really tends to stay in that medieval time period. And it's not congruent with
Yes.
where we are now. And how this time is really challenging us to to call forth that interior sense that you've spoken about so eloquently today, and why it's so
Thank
important.
you.
Taylor
Hmm.
talks about it in terms of ultraphysics. I mean, he talks about it in a lot of different ways, but the term that's coming to mind for me right now is ultraphysics, where in short, he says that we'll develop this new system of study that will replace metaphysics, it will surpass it, because it's really this synthesis of what we know beyond us and what we know within us. And there's no finality in that, right? The self
Yes.
is just continually unfolding. God is continually unfolding. And I think that's such a beautiful heading to set our course toward, right? Toward that mystery of not just conquering the world in all our knowledge, but in a way allowing our hearts to be conquered too.
Absolutely. And recognizing that we're all evolving together, and that it doesn't help any of us to, one person to be out, so far ahead and everybody else behind. It really works when we all are in synchrony and supporting each other. It's really the goal. One of your guests, Andrew, I recall, talked about the cardosphere, and that was new to me. So it might have been John Hout, Dr. John Hout. I'm not sure.
I think it was Lou Savory.
Lou Savory. Oh, Lou Savory. Okay. I love Lou Savory's books. Yes. So beyond the noosphere, for your listeners who aren't familiar with this convergence of thought that
Mhm.
we're emerging toward, is the cardosphere, which would be the emergence of our heart and love and working towards the betterment of all. That just makes such sense, doesn't it? To think that our evolution, a healthy evolution, will bring us into that space, not in a space of competition and diminishment, but in a space of abundance and love and cooperation. Seems to be the only way.
Yeah, we have it pretty easy here on Earth at this period in time in the
Mm,
Western world, in North
mm,
America, especially in our socioeconomic class, right? We've got it
mm,
pretty easy. And that's not something that's been a constant throughout evolution. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of struggle, a lot of turmoil, death,
mm.
upheaval. All of these things that we perceive to be in some light negative have played a very pivotal role in getting us to this point now, where we are having these realizations about the world and discoveries through science and applied studies and things like that. But really, it seems like the next frontier for us to conquer, or maybe, like I used the word before, be conquered in, is that of our heart. And it takes a great humility balanced with the great pride, if you will, and these things that we've been able to accomplish.
Absolutely. And Teilhard points us in that direction for sure.
So, Tess, what theme would you say from Teilhard's work or vision, his larger body of work, is most relevant for our world right now, especially for younger people? I know we've talked about this on and off more or less throughout our conversation, but what would you say we could benefit the most from right now?
I have to go back to the simple statement of God in all things, that we can see God in all things, and that God is this force that unifies us and brings us together. I think that and Teilhard's vision of looking that we're evolving, we continue to evolve, not just physically, but spiritually,
Mhm.
and that hopefully that evolution is bringing us closer to a convergence that honors diversity. That would be it.
Yeah, God in all things. There's a line from Him to Matter where Teilhard says something to the effect of, to look for God in the realms where saints would think to avoid you, or think to
Mm.
avoid God. Yeah, that goes back, I think, to a lot of our religious upbringing institutionally, and how we're taught where to look for God and where not to look for God, in effect, right?
Mm.
Morality plays a huge role in that. Um, but really, part of maturing and part of learning what healing and wholeness is learning to embrace the all of our experience, right? Those experiences which make us feel close to God, as well as those experiences where we feel some sense of distance, and desolation as well. And considering that as the whole, speaks to that notion of finding God in all things, right? Even
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, even
for
those
sure.
experiences have been trying, have still in some way worked for our development.
Right. And those are, St. Ignatius points out, those are the natural rhythms of life. Like we can expect that there will be consolation, a feeling of drawing close to God, and there are going to be times of desolation where we feel far from God, removed from God, everything feels bleak. And St. Ignatius gives us rules to deal with both, right? So when you're in consolation, he encourages us to store up those graces in our heart so that when we slip into desolation, we can draw upon those graces. And also, when we're in desolation, to know that we're in a natural rhythm of life that we will pass through, and consolation will come again. We don't know when, but that is a rhythm of life. And I see that in Teilhard's life. He went through periods of consolation, of his love for his work and his enthusiasm, and then deep and terrible periods of desolation. And I think when he felt like the world was pushing him away or not honoring his work or not understanding his intentions and ostracizing him. So his life is a model, an example of those rhythms. And yet he endured and persisted and left us this beautiful legacy of all of his work. Um, I must say, I did go to visit his grave, the cemetery, and I just was so moved by being in his presence, and the simplicity of his grave was so beautiful. The humility and humbleness of it. He just was such a gift to us. We have so much to be thankful for, and to his secretary who saved his works for publication. Amazing.
Yeah, the friends and family members that he corresponded with and allowed him to expand his thinking at a time when he was limited in his ability through his order and his own church to do that, right? They were
Yeah.
little sounding boards for him as he was developing this really radical way of thinking. And it had to be relational, right? It had to have input from other people. Because that's the
Yeah.
crux of his theory is that for us to really exist, we have to be in relationship.
Right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. I think it was Tracy Higgins over the weekend of our meeting, the annual meeting, who mentioned that there are still letters being translated. So there are even more letters that we have not yet seen, or the public has not yet seen. So that's exciting that his legacy continues to unfold. And what an incredible gift. And also, what an incredible gift this organization is. So I have to admit that I'm so grateful for the work that you do, Andrew, and everyone who's involved in the organization, because it offers so much to so many people in a very humble and modest way. It makes it accessible to everyone. I would encourage all of our listeners today to think about joining the ATA.
Well, we certainly appreciate that
Yeah,
plug, Tess. We're very
yeah,
grateful to
I mean that.
yeah, to have attracted someone like yourself who is so
Oh,
involved
thank
with their
you.
community, their faith, and really helping others in that journey as well is a wonderful thing. So maybe to inspire our listeners and viewers today, you can send us off with some words of encouragement here. What gives you hope in these tumultuous times that you've alluded to in, chaotic current events? What gives you hope?
Well, hope is an action, right? Doesn't land on you. I think it takes work. But what gives me hope is when I am able to see, when I do intentionally see God in in my interactions, in my inter relationships in nature, when I see that animating energy of God, uh, that gives me hope. That gives me hope. And the concept that we are evolving, and I do believe, as Teilhard told us, that we're evolving toward a higher level of consciousness. That gives me great hope.
Amen.
Mm. I have a quick quiz for you. Do you have a few minutes to do a Ignatius versus Teilhard quote quiz?
Sure, I'll try. You're putting me
Do you
on the
want
spot.
to
This
do
will be fun. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you a few quotes, and you can tell me if you think it's Ignatius or Teilhard. It is not a question of finding God in one thing, but finding God in everything.
I'm gonna say Ignatius.
Good, yes. Love ought to manifest itself more by deeds than by words.
Ignatius.
Good. Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them.
Teilhard.
Yes, good for you. Go forth and set the world on fire.
Ignatius.
Good. Oh my gosh, Andrew. Nothing is profane for those who know how to see.
Teilhard.
100%.
That was fun. That was
You
fun.
did it. A plus plus.
Thank you.
Good.
Maybe you could like come up with that for our website or something. That would be fun, interactive.
Oh, I have a whole list of them. I just gave you the top five.
Oh, yeah, that was good. I'm a theology, spirituality nerd, so
I love it. I love
yeah,
it.
that hit
That's
the nail on the
wonderful.
head.
We
Well,
need more
hopefully,
of you.
yeah, our audience appreciates that too, and
Mm.
Tess, you have a prayer to close us out today. Is that right?
I do. One of the prayers that I hold near and dear to my heart and share often is a prayer by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and it's called the slow work of God. Some people refer to it as patient trust. So, if you will, we'll begin. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. Yet it is the law of all progress that is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Do not try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances, acting on your own goodwill will make you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming in you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Above all, trust in the slow work of God, our loving vine dresser. Amen.
Amen.
And I just want to point out that not all of the versions of this end with vine dresser, but to bring it back to Teilhard's experience in his childhood, he grew up in France, and a vine dresser is the person who prunes the vines of the grapes. So pruning the dead leaves and branches or the excess growth so that the grape can be sweeter and better. So God, thinking about God in that way, that God prunes us and is always looking to strengthen us and always looking for us to reach for our greatest and highest self.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tess.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Andrew. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Likewise. Finally, Tess, where can our guests find you online?
If someone would like to reach me, they can go to unitivespiritualdirection.com. It's a small website and people can contact me there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
being with us today. Thank you for all your work that you do, and we'll look forward to staying connected in the future.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure.